Hey there. Ever notice how, like, a single word can totally make someone just come alive in your mind?
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep, into the art of describing people.
Right.
Not just the, basics, but like really going beyond just saying nice or tall, you know, to paint a truly vivid picture.
Mhm.
And we'll be exploring your source material on this, which, by the way, is super fascinating stuff. It
Yeah.
can help with everything from like creative writing to even just understanding people better.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for like personality and appearance.
Yeah,
You'll be surprised how much you can learn about someone, and you know how you can make others see them clearly just by choosing the right words.
I like that. Okay, so the sources suggest that we start with personality traits, and I'm always drawn to the positive ones first. Let's just take kind, for example.
It seems like super simple,
Mm-hmm.
but kindness is more than just being nice. Like the research in your source material actually links kindness to increased life satisfaction and even like better cardiovascular health. Who knew being a good person was good for your heart? Literally.
That's amazing.
Okay.
It's like kindness ripples outward, benefiting not just the giver, but like everyone around them. And speaking of ripple effects, what about charismatic? We all know those people who just like light up a room when they walk in.
Yeah, and you don't have to be born with it.
Oh, really?
One of the sources actually breaks down techniques for developing charisma,
Oh, wow.
like active listening and mirroring body language.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to captivate an audience just by subtly reflecting their movements.
Whoa, that's next level stuff. I'm going to have to practice my mirroring skills. Now, life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, so let's flip the script
Yeah.
and talk about those not so desirable traits. What about stubborn? I have to admit, I've been accused of that myself a time or two.
Well, the source makes a great point. Stubbornness is often rooted in fear, like fear of change, fear of being wrong, fear of losing control.
Yeah.
So maybe instead of labeling someone stubborn, we should ask ourselves, what are they afraid of?
That's such a compassionate way to approach it. It's like turning judgment into curiosity. Okay, let's keep going down this list. What about arrogant? I can think of a few people who could use a dose of humility.
And here's where it gets interesting. Arrogance is often a mask for insecurity. The source actually cites studies showing that arrogant individuals often have low self-esteem and use boasting to overcompensate.
Wow, it's like they're trying to convince themselves as much as everyone else. So maybe beneath that bravado is someone who's actually pretty fragile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe instead of getting annoyed, we could try to understand what's driving that behavior. Now, there are some traits that aren't inherently good or bad, but more about personal style,
Right.
like introversion versus extroversion.
Right. And I think this is where understanding context really matters. Some of the articles you've got here talk about how different cultures view introversion. In some, it's seen as thoughtful and wise, while in others, it might be mistaken for shyness or even rudeness.
That's why expanding your vocabulary isn't just about memorizing words. It's about understanding the subtle ways those words can be interpreted, depending on the situation and the people involved.
Okay, so we've explored some personality traits from the positive to the challenging and everything in between. But a person is more than just their personality, right?
Right.
Their appearance plays a big role in how we perceive them, too.
Absolutely. And just like with personality, the details matter. Your source material breaks down appearance into categories, which is a great way to approach it. Shall we start with facial features?
Let's do it. I've always been fascinated by how a single feature can change someone's entire look, like sharp cheekbones, for example.
It instantly creates this image of someone who's angular, maybe even a bit intimidating.
Oh, yeah?
One of the sources actually connects sharp cheekbones to perceived competence and trustworthiness,
Hmm.
particularly in leadership roles.
That's fascinating. I never would have thought of that. So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about the subconscious messages those features convey.
Exactly. And those messages can vary across cultures too.
Oh, really?
For example, in some cultures, a square jawline might be associated with strength and masculinity, while in others, it might be seen as simply a neutral feature.
It's like a whole secret language we're decoding here. Okay, I have to admit, describing body types can be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
How do we do that in a way that's accurate but also sensitive?
Your sources offer some great guidance on this. They emphasize using objective terms that avoid judgment or comparison. So instead of saying thin or heavy, you might use slender or athletic to describe someone's build.
That makes sense. It's about focusing on shape and physique rather than making statements about someone's size. But is curvy always a positive term? What does the source say about the potential downsides of labeling?
That's a great question. And it highlights how even seemingly positive words can carry baggage or be misconstrued. The source acknowledges that curvy can be empowering for some, but also mentions how it can still be used to objectify or reduce someone to their physical attributes.
It's a reminder that language is always evolving, and we need to stay attuned to those nuances and be mindful of the impact our words can have. Speaking of nuances, what about clothing and style? That can tell you so much about a person.
Absolutely. Clothing is a powerful form of self-expression. One of your sources goes beyond basic terms like casual or formal and encourages you to get specific.
Oh, okay.
Think about the fabrics, the colors, the patterns, the accessories. Each choice adds another layer to the portrait you're creating.
So instead of just saying someone is wearing a dress, you could say they're wearing a vintage floral sundress with a delicate lace trim.
Right.
It paints a much more vivid picture.
Exactly. And those details can offer clues about the person's personality, their interests, their cultural background, even their mood. It's like being a detective, piecing together clues to create a complete picture.
I love that analogy. Okay, we've talked about personality and appearance separately, but I'm curious, how do we combine those to create a truly compelling description?
One of your sources provides a fantastic example that I think perfectly illustrates this. She's a tall, warm-hearted woman with a bohemian sense of style. See how those elements come together to create a multi-dimensional image.
It's so much more engaging than just saying she's tall and kind. You get a sense of her personality, her physical presence, and her unique style, all woven together beautifully.
And it makes you want to know more about her, right?
Yeah.
It sparks curiosity and invites you to imagine her story. That's the power of combining those elements effectively.
So let's put this into practice. I'm going to describe someone, and I want you to try to picture them in your mind. Ready?
I'm all ears.
Okay, here goes. He's a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines that crinkle around his eyes. He has a kind of mischievous twinkle in his gaze, and he's always wearing something quirky, like mismatched socks or a brightly colored hat. He's quick-witted, loves a good debate, and has a knack for making everyone feel at ease.
I can practically see him standing there. You've managed to capture not just his physical appearance, but also his personality and even his energy. It's like he walked right off the page.
That's the goal. But I'm curious, could you try describing someone for me? Let's see if I can picture them as vividly as you did mine.
All right, challenge accepted. Let me see. She has a quiet intensity about her, with piercing blue eyes that seem to see right through you. She moves with a dancer's grace, and her clothes are always simple but elegant, like a perfectly draped black turtleneck and tailored trousers. She's a woman of few words, but when she speaks, everyone listens. She's deeply insightful, fiercely loyal, and has a dry wit that catches you off guard.
Wow, she sounds absolutely captivating. I can definitely see her. The elegance, the intelligence, that hint of mystery. You've totally nailed it. It's amazing how a few well-chosen words can create such a strong impression.
That's the beauty of language.
Yeah.
It's a tool that allows us to share our perceptions, create connections, and build understanding.
And sometimes those perceptions can be influenced by factors we might not even be aware of, right?
Right.
Like cultural differences, for example. What does the source material say about that?
One of the articles dives deep into the importance of cultural sensitivity when describing people. It highlights how what might be considered a neutral or even positive descriptor in one culture could be offensive or inappropriate in another.
I see your point. Like, I remember in the source material, it talked about how in some cultures, using the word fat can be really, really offensive.
Exactly.
I see your point about fat, but couldn't that vary within a culture too?
Oh, absolutely.
What about generational differences? You know, what my grandmother considers polite might be totally different from what I do.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about different countries or ethnicities. Even within a single culture, there could be huge variations in language and perception based on age, socioeconomic background, regional dialects, you name it.
It's a good reminder that communication is a two-way street.
Yeah.
We have to be mindful of both what we're saying and how it's being received by the other person.
And sometimes, even with the best of intentions, we might stumble or make mistakes.
Oh, for sure.
It's important to be open to feedback, willing to learn, and always striving to be more sensitive and inclusive in our language.
Speaking of stumbling, have you ever noticed how certain words or phrases can completely derail a conversation? It's like stepping on a linguistic landmine.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
And that's a great segue into another fascinating aspect of describing people, the tricky balance between observation and interpretation. It's like that game we played as kids, telephone.
Oh, yeah.
One person whispers a phrase, and by the time it gets around the circle, it's totally distorted. Like describing people can be a bit like that too.
I can totally see that. We're constantly filtering information through our own experiences and biases, even when we're trying to be objective.
One of your sources uses the example of a job interview. Imagine two interviewers observing the same candidate.
Okay.
One might describe them as like confident and articulate, while the other might say they're arrogant and rehearsed.
Yeah.
It's the same person, but the interpretation colors the entire description.
It's a good reminder to be aware of our own subjective lens, especially when those descriptions could have like real world consequences, like in a hiring decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we see in others is actually a reflection of ourselves.
Ooh, that's a deep one. It's like that saying, we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions.
Exactly. And that's why mindfulness is so crucial when we're describing people. Are we truly seeing them, or are we just projecting our own desires, fears, or even past experiences onto them?
This makes me think about first impressions, which, let's be honest, can be pretty powerful. I know I've been guilty of judging a book by its cover more than once.
The source material actually talks about the halo effect, which is a cognitive bias where our initial impression of someone, whether positive or negative, influences how we perceive everything else about them.
So if we meet someone who seems charming and attractive, we might subconsciously overlook their flaws or interpret their actions more favorably.
It's like we're wearing rose-colored glasses. And on the flip side, if we initially dislike someone, we might be more likely to focus on their negative qualities and discount their positive attributes.
It's like we're looking for evidence to confirm our first impression rather than seeing them with fresh eyes. So how do we break free from those snap judgments?
One of the sources suggests practicing something called cognitive flexibility. It's about being willing to update our beliefs as we gather new information, instead of clinging to those initial impressions.
So instead of just writing someone off as boring after a 5-minute conversation, we should be open to the possibility that there are hidden depths we haven't yet discovered.
Exactly. It's like peeling an onion. There are layers to every person, and it takes time and effort to get to know them truly.
Speaking of layers, I think it's important to acknowledge that language has its limitations, right? We can never fully capture the essence of another human being through words alone.
Absolutely. Language is a tool, but it's an imperfect one. There will always be unspoken emotions, unexpressed experiences, and unarticulated thoughts that words simply cannot convey.
It's like trying to describe the beauty of a sunset. You can use all the right words, golden hues, fiery sky, breathtaking vista, but it'll never fully capture the experience of witnessing it firsthand.
And that's where nonverbal communication comes in. Your source material emphasizes how body language, tone of voice, and facial expressions can all add layers of meaning to our descriptions.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes a single look can tell you more than an hour-long conversation. I'm thinking about those subtle cues, like a raised eyebrow or a nervous fidget, that can reveal someone's true feelings even if their words are saying something else entirely.
And have you ever noticed how someone's voice can change depending on who they're talking to?
Oh, yeah.
They might speak softly and sweetly to their child, but bark orders at their employees.
It's like they're speaking a different language altogether. And it's not just about tone. Think about posture. Someone who's slouching might convey insecurity or lack of interest, while someone who stands tall with their shoulders back might project confidence and authority.
Exactly. And those nonverbal cues can be incredibly powerful, especially when it comes to first impressions.
Right.
Research shows that we form judgments about people within milliseconds of meeting them, based largely on their appearance and body language.
That's amazing. So even before someone utters a single word, we're already forming opinions about them based on how they look and carry themselves.
One of your sources actually dives into the fascinating world of microexpressions, which are fleeting, involuntary facial expressions that can reveal hidden emotions.
Oh, I've heard of those. It's like our faces betray our true feelings for a split second, even if we're trying to keep them hidden.
Exactly. A microexpression might be a quick flash of fear, anger, or disgust that's gone as quickly as it appeared. But for someone who knows what to look for, It can be a window into someone's inner world.
So is it like learning to read minds? Could I become a human lie detector if I study microexpressions long enough?
Huh. Well, it's not quite that simple. While microexpressions can be insightful, it's important to remember that they're just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Context is key, and we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions based on a fleeting facial expression.
That makes sense. It's like if someone quickly furrows their brow, it could mean they're confused, disagreeing, or even just concentrating really hard.
Right.
We can't assume we know what's going on in their head without more information.
We also have to be mindful of cultural differences. What might be considered appropriate nonverbal communication in one culture could be offensive or misconstrued in another.
Like, I know in some cultures, direct eye contact is seen as a sign of respect, but in others, it can be perceived as challenging or aggressive.
Exactly. And physical touch, like a handshake or a hug, can have vastly different meanings across cultures. It's so important to be aware of those nuances to avoid unintentional misunderstandings.
It's like there's this whole hidden language of nonverbal cues that we're constantly sending and receiving, whether we're aware of it or not.
And by becoming more attuned to those cues, both our own and those of others, we can become more effective communicators, build stronger relationships, and navigate social situations with greater ease and understanding.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from personality traits to physical appearance, from verbal descriptions to nonverbal cues, from first impressions to cultural sensitivities. It's like we've been on a whirlwind tour of the human experience.
And we've barely scratched the surface. But I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding how to describe people in a way that's nuanced, insightful, and even transformative.
Speaking of transformative, one of your sources talks about the power of descriptive language to not only reflect reality, but to actually shape it. How does that work?
Well, think about the stories we tell ourselves and others about who we are. Those narratives can become self-fulfilling prophecies. If we constantly describe ourselves as shy or awkward, we might limit our social interactions and miss out on opportunities to connect.
But if we start to describe ourselves as confident and outgoing, even if we don't feel that way at first, those words can start to change how we see ourselves and how others perceive us.
Exactly. It's like we're rewiring our brains and creating new possibilities for ourselves just by changing the language we use.
This reminds me of a study I read about where teachers were told that certain students had high potential, even though those students were randomly selected. And guess what? Those students ended up performing better academically.
It's the Pygmalion effect in action. Our beliefs and expectations about others can actually influence their behavior, and our descriptions play a role in shaping those beliefs.
It's like we have this incredible power to either lift people up or hold them back with our words. It's a huge responsibility, but also a really exciting opportunity.
And it makes you think about the impact our descriptions can have on our relationships, both personal and professional. If we focus on someone's negative qualities, we might create distance and conflict. But if we choose to highlight their strengths and celebrate their uniqueness, we can foster connection, respect, and even love.
It's like we're choosing to see the best in people, and in doing so, we might actually inspire them to become their best selves.
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of describing people: the role of storytelling. One of the sources you provided uses a brilliant analogy. Imagine you're describing a painting.
Okay.
You could simply list the colors and shapes. But you know that wouldn't capture the emotion, the movement, the story that the artist is trying to convey.
Yeah, it's like the difference between saying there's a red circle and a blue square and saying the swirling red strokes evoke a sense of passion while the solid blue square represents a feeling of grounded stability.
Yeah.
One is just data, the other is art.
Precisely. And when we describe people, we're essentially painting word portraits. And just like with visual art, storytelling can make those portraits come alive.
So how do we do that? How do we weave those descriptive details into a narrative that truly captures someone's essence?
It starts with observation, like paying attention to those little moments that reveal something unique about the person.
Okay.
Maybe it's the way they light up when they talk about their passion,
Right.
or a gesture they make when they're feeling nervous, or a story they tell that reveals their values.
And then we find a way to connect those observations to a larger narrative, right? Like, instead of just saying, my friend is really generous, you could tell a story about a time when they went out of their way to help someone in need.
Exactly. The story provides context, emotion, and makes the description so much more memorable and impactful. It's like giving the listener a glimpse into that person's soul.
This makes me think about how we describe historical figures. We often remember them through anecdotes and stories that reveal their character, rather than just through lists of accomplishments.
Right.
Like, everyone knows about Abraham Lincoln's honesty because of the story about him walking miles to return a few pennies he overcharged a customer.
That's a great example. The story makes Lincoln's honesty tangible and relatable. It's not just an abstract virtue, it's something he embodied in his daily life.
I'm starting to realize that describing people is a lot like detective work. We're gathering clues, piecing together information, and trying to create a narrative that makes sense of who they are.
And just like a good detective, we have to be open to new evidence and willing to revise our theories as we learn more. People are complex and ever-evolving, so our descriptions should reflect that.
One of the sources you sent me talks about the importance of balancing positive and negative traits when we're describing someone.
Yes.
It makes sense, nobody's perfect, and focusing only on the good or the bad can create a distorted picture.
It's like those old-fashioned portraits where everyone looks impossibly flawless and idealized. It doesn't feel real, does it?
Not at all. I'd much rather see a portrait that captures someone's flaws and imperfections, because that's what makes them human and relatable.
And it's those imperfections that often make people interesting. Think about the most compelling characters in literature and film. They're often the ones who are struggling with inner conflicts, making mistakes, and learning from their experiences.
It's like we're drawn to those rough edges, those moments of vulnerability, because they remind us that we're all in this together.
And it's through those imperfections that we can often see someone's true character shine through. Like someone who's quick to anger might also be fiercely loyal and protective of those they love.
So instead of just labeling someone as angry, we could say they have a fiery temper, but they're also incredibly devoted to their family and friends.
Right.
It creates a more nuanced and balanced portrait.
Exactly. And it invites the listener to see that person as a whole rather than just a collection of traits.
All of this makes me think about how much power we have as individuals to shape how others perceive the people around us.
Right.
If we're constantly gossiping or spreading negative stories, we're contributing to a culture of judgment and negativity.
But if we choose to focus on people's strengths, celebrate their accomplishments, and tell stories that highlight their best qualities, we can create a ripple effect of positivity and understanding.
It's like we're choosing to see the good in the world. And in doing so, we're inviting others to do the same.
And you never know, that simple shift in perspective might have a profound impact on someone's life.
Well, we've explored the art of describing people from all angles today. From the power of specific language to the nuances of nonverbal communication, from the impact of cultural context to the transformative potential of storytelling. What are some of the key takeaways you'd like to leave our listener with?
First and foremost, I'd say remember that words matter.
Yeah.
They have the power to shape perceptions, build connections, and even influence reality. Choose your words carefully, thoughtfully, and with empathy.
And be mindful of the stories you're telling.
Yeah.
Are they stories that uplift, inspire, and create understanding? Or are they stories that tear down, judge, and perpetuate negativity?
Remember that everyone has a story to tell, and those stories are often far more complex and nuanced than we might initially realize.
Approach people with curiosity, open-mindedness, and a genuine desire to see them for who they truly are.
And never underestimate the power of a well-told story to change hearts, minds, and even the world.
So, how has your perception of describing people changed after this deep dive? What words will you use differently now? Keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, the most captivating stories are often the ones we discover in the people around us.